All right, this is your Tech Nugget. We are here talking about Coke drum foam overs, what to do during a foam over. Very scary time, happens to just about everybody, so be prepared. So let's get right into it. So we're going to talk about prevention first. A little ounce of prevention is always better than dealing with the aftermath. First things first, believe your instruments. That's critical. Whether or not you have neutron backscatter or gamma or a combination of both, you need to know what those instruments are telling you and how they are different. We've had some excellent presentations from over the years from our friends at Berthold and Vega about the differences in these measurements and how they can be a bit confusing at times. So make sure you understand what your level instruments are telling you and where they are relative to other things on your drums, like your TIs, your skin TIs on your drum. Those can be a secondary verification of what's happening, but make sure you believe your instrumentation. Next, also be aware of high risk times. So we're talking about times when we know foaming is going to increase. This is during online spalling. You're putting a ton of extra steam in the Coke drums. Higher velocity equals more foam. Let's talk about low temperature drums. Anytime you have a low temperature drum, you're killing those reactions. If and when you get that thing back going again, that material is going to foam up a lot more. And it takes time, on the orders of hours after a low temperature event has occurred. If you get everything situated, that foam can come roaring back, so pay attention. The primary cause of low temperature drums is often heater trips, so be aware after you've had a heater trip, that's a likely time to pay attention. And then lastly, if you've had a bad backwarm, you know everything's not as hot as normally, it's going to take longer for those reactions to get going, build that foam. So be aware of high risk times. Next, be proactive with your anti-foam and feed rate. If you're sensing you're in a high level situation and you don't understand why, first order of business, put in anti-foam. Second order of business, cut feed rate. Yeah, your boss might yell at you later about it, but your boss is going to be a lot more happy if you don't foam the unit over and shut it down for a week or two to clean it out. So be proactive with your anti-foam and your feed rate. And then lastly, we have the technology now to do smart calculations about what's happening in the Coke drum real time. So you can use things like feed rate, your typical concarbon. I know it varies for different refiners, but pick a number or give the operators in the control room the opportunity to plug that number in from a recent sample result, and it can adjust how quickly or slowly you're building level in the Coke drum, and that can inform the operator as to whether or not you're significantly lower or significantly higher than that. Both of those are useful pieces of information that they can react to. So build smart levels, smart alarms, deviations alarms, all these things are possible to be implemented. So ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure, but if you get yourself into a situation, let's talk about how to react. So first order of business in a foam over, increase pressure. Increasing pressure will suppress that foam front, which is excellent. However, it is really just a temporary solution. I've actually done some playing around in cokers over the years where we've sort of artificially manipulated pressure in a safe time during the Coke drum, and we've actually been able to see the foam squish down with higher pressure, and then when we release the pressure, it comes right back to where it was, basically on exactly the same trend line. So if you push down on this foam, it might buy you some time to make some reactions, which is very useful, and you should consider doing that. But if you ultimately release that pressure, it's going to go back to right where it was before. So pressure variations can have a significant impact on the level of foam in the Coke drum. So think about that. Next, of course, maximize your anti-foam. If you have 2 anti-foam pumps, put both of them on. If you have 3 anti-foam pumps, put all of them on. I've actually worked with one plant that actually had a fairly creative solution. I've only ever seen it one place. They actually had some sort of emergency vessel like you would on an amine tower, where you have a concentrated dose of anti-foam where you can just mainline inject that into the Coke drum at a moment's notice, really knock that foam down significantly. Because you got to remember that the anti-foam pumps are all the way down on the ground, and it's a fairly small flow and a fairly long line up to the coke drum. So even if you turn everything on at the ground, it takes a while for it to get there. So it's obvious to state, but just keep in mind, go full flow on the antifoam. You can deal with the chemical cost later. Next, this is an interesting debate, and honestly, I could probably do a whole video about whether or not you want to stay in the blowdown or stay in the main fractionator during a Foamover event. And I have to say, it really depends. It depends on how deep you are into the Foamover. If you catch it early, probably better to go to the blowdown. If you're deep into the Foamover event and you've already messed up your main fractionator, you don't want to swing into the blowdown, which is lower pressure, which is going to generate more foam, and really wreck the blowdown, and now you have two towers to clean out. I've heard both sides of this argument for years. My general recommendation is if you catch it early enough and you can tolerate it, I always recommend going to the blowdown. So putting the squeeze on the drum, buying yourself some time, swinging into the blowdown is probably your better course of action, because the blowdown is more readily equipped to handle coke removal in a major way. All main fractionators can handle massive amounts of coke carryover as effectively. So, but again, it really depends. There's no straightforward answer on this one, but make sure you have a plan for your site. We recommend flowcharts, kind of gaming this out with some of your senior operators, senior engineering staff, me perhaps. I love getting involved in those discussions. But make sure you game it out and have a plan that's specific to your plant and that everyone knows what you're going to do. You're going to do boom, 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 and everything's going to happen pretty quickly, because you don't want a lot of people standing around wondering what to do when things carrying over. Next, consider having some sort of smart trips at very high levels in the coke drum. Now, depending on your instrumentation, these can be a little bit tricky to implement, but again, we have the technology to know where you are in the cycle, whether or not you're online or offline, and that can turn trips on or off. But there are people that have done clever things with trips around the drum, with the antifoam system, even the heater feed itself, to making sure that if you do get into a very severe Foamover event, things happen automatically. But again, this gets back to my previous point, which is have a plan. Next, if and when this happens, you are going to be cleaning strainers for days. This is the best case scenario. Ultimately, there have been many places that have been able to get all of the coke out of their fractionator or blowdown after a minor Foamover event without a major shutdown. But you need to bring extra people in, getting the maintenance people ready, because you're going to be swinging strainers every few hours to get that coke out of the major vessels, and it's a messy job. And that brings me back to another point that's maybe not related, but I'm going to chuck it in here anyways, is make sure you have a good procedure and good lockout tagout for those strainers. People have been burned, people have screwed up the valve lineups, putting resid and other nasty things into places they shouldn't be with these strainers, and when you're in a Foamover event, you're moving fast and furious and mistakes can happen. So make sure you have an excellent procedure for those bottom of the fractionator, bottom of the blowdown strainers. And then lastly, monitor the pressure drop in whatever vessel you happen to be foaming over to, because there have been some pretty severe Foamovers that have actually carried into the overhead fin fans of the blowdown, or plugged or partially plugged the upper elevations of the main fractionator and the heavy gas oil in the wash zone section, depending on what type of internals you have. So really pay attention to your DP in the hours and days after your event, because you may think you've survived it when in fact you're still just sort of dealing with the consequences of this Foamover event. So it's an unfortunate situation. I hope that it doesn't happen to you, but Foamovers are a reality of our industry. I hope that you enjoyed this tech nugget. You have some takeaways. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me, evan@coking.com, and we will try to get your questions answered.